So welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Lorai and I'm the program director at the Interfaith Center at Miami University, and we're located in Oxford, Ohio. The Interfaith Center is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to invite people from diverse secular, spiritual, and religious traditions to participate in one another's practices in order to cultivate appreciative understanding and friendship. We seek to unify people around common moral, social, and ethical concerns in order to build a more just and equitable society. So today we're going to talk about deconstruction, and we have a guest today named Phil Drysdale. And Phil is a public speaker, a podcaster, a researcher, and guide specializing in the area of deconstruction. For the last 10 years, he's helped people navigate the painful journey away from their inherited faith traditions. He does research within the deconstruction community through the Deconstruction Network and provides free resources to help people on their journeys. So welcome, Phil. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. So we'll, if you would, tell us a little bit more about yourself and tell us a little bit more about deconstruction and what it actually is.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I am a pastor's kid. I grew up in the Christian faith in a quasi-conservative, slightly charismatic home. And over the years, my own faith evolved and developed, and I explored different churches and moved around the world. I spent a lot of time in lots of different places around the world, exploring different ways to do Christianity, constantly seeking the right way to do Christianity. Because we all want to do the right thing, right? We want to know what's right, especially in these big topics, of eternity and, figuring out what's right in the world and our purpose. You got to get it right. You don't want to spend your whole life doing it wrong. And so I was very passionate about figuring out what I should do. And in time, I kind of felt I found a bit more of a groove. I started traveling. I started speaking all over the world in different churches, doing conferences and church meetings and all sorts of different things, speaking in ministry schools and colleges and stuff. And as I was traveling all over the world, speaking in all sorts of different places, I myself was finding that as I was more even more intentionally diving into my faith to try and find the right answers, because when you travel and speak, you're supposed to know the answers to everything, which is a ridiculous thing to expect of anyone, of course. But there's like a fire put under your butt. You can't play around when you're the one given all the answers. You really need to know. And I myself started to find a lot of the things that I held to be so certain in my faith started to unravel, and I started to ask lots of questions. But alongside that, what I found is as I was traveling and speaking, there's a weird dynamic that happens when you go to a church and speak there, or you go to a conference and speak there. When you're the visitor that's from thousands of miles away, I'm over in the UK, and I'm speaking maybe in somewhere in California, people come up to you at the end and go, "Hey, can I talk to you?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And you kind of think maybe they're going to ask me to pray for them or something like that. And they're like, "I don't know what I think about this topic, and I'm scared to ask my pastor, because I know it's a really taboo topic, but what do you think?" And you suddenly realize that you become this confidant, because people aren't at any risk telling the stranger that's probably never coming back to their church anyway, that they've got questions, they've got doubts. And what I found was across the world, every church I went to, I met dozens and dozens and dozens of people that had serious doubts, questions about real core things to their faith, not some kind of like peripheral thing, but really, really real important issues, the sort of things that if they did ask those questions to their pastor, they might find themselves getting in real trouble. People wouldn't even talk to their partners about some of these things. These are really, really big deal questions that were, if the answers weren't what they thought the answer was historically, they could be looking at a very different future in their ahead for them, losing their communities, losing their relationships with their loved ones, maybe family, disengaging and disconnecting from them. Lots of really big ramifications. Might even lose their faith. They may not even be able to call themselves a Christian anymore. And so I found this more and more as I traveled. And one of the things I realized was the person I used to be, the person that went around and gave everyone the clear-cut answers that everyone really knows. It's kind of that kind of world is almost people traveling around and patting you on the back saying, oh, someone from somewhere else agrees with us, we're fine. There's 1,000,001 people doing that. You can't, we have an expression in the UK, you can't swing a cat without hitting someone. I don't know where that expression comes from, and it's very disturbing. But, you can't swing a cat around the church without hitting 20 people that will have an opinion and will be able to console you and give you answers that fit within your current belief system. But when you start to have questions, there's not so many people to turn to. And I started to realize that so many of these people, dozens in almost every church I went to, didn't have someone to talk to, didn't have someone a safe place to ask questions. They just didn't have someone like that. If you asked your friends in the church, they might tell a pastor, this guy is questioning hell, or this person doesn't believe in the virgin birth, or whatever it might be. In different religions, it's going to be a different thing. So in my world, I came out of Christianity. I do work with people from different religions occasionally, but generally speaking, because my background is Christianity, mostly it's Christians that are asking questions and doubts come to me. And so it opened me up to this whole world. I started to explore and study what's going on here. This seems like a really big deal, and I had no idea this was going on. And so you start to look at some of the data, and you open up any kind of Google Scholar and start typing in some terms about the church and changes in faith and religion. And you'll quickly see that there's a very clear trajectory that the world is on. And it's certainly in the West, and that is a decrease away from conventional religions. Conventional religions are shrinking in the West on the whole. You could argue certain types of religions are growing by, increase in family sizes and things like that. But generally speaking, very few people are converting to religions. Even within Christianity, a few subsets of Christianity are actually growing. But what they found is that they're growing because people from other types of Christianity are moving to them. But those groups are still shrinking at the same rate. So actually, even though they're growing, they're losing the same amount of people. And you give it long enough, they're still shrinking. And so it's a really interesting dynamic. I found that back in 2014, there was 2,700 people in America that left the church for good every day. Every day, 2,700 people. Current numbers are even more remarkable. I was looking at a study the other day from the GSS, and this is in 2018, but between 2006 and 2018, on average, 3.88 million people in America every year became a nun. Now, these terms are all thrown around in lots of ways. So you've got deconstruction, you've got disaffiliated, you've got dechurched, you've got nuns, you've got duns, and they all have their unique kind of aspects, and they all at times kind of cross over. If you had a Venn diagram, there'd be a lot of higgledy-piggledy, and somewhere in the middle, you'll find some sort of term that encapsulates a lot of people. So nuns is a great term that works for a lot of people, but a lot of people at Deconstruct don't become a nun. They don't have no faith. Many people at Deconstruct still hold to the faith they came out of. They just have changed what that might look for them. So maybe they became a bit more progressive. Maybe they moved to a progressive church, or maybe they came out of evangelicalism and became a mainline Christian, or something like that. So it's not so clear cut. Some people come out of Christianity and move into things like Buddhism or Hinduism. They may be attracted to some of the more Eastern philosophies around religion. And so it's not as simple as they leave religion. So it's not that they believe nothing. Some believe nothing though. It's not that they're spiritual but not religious, but actually a lot are spiritual and not religious. Of those 2,700 people that leave the church every day, when they looked at that, 78% of them said they still had some form of spirituality. So 4 out of 5 of those people are saying, yeah, we still believe in some sort of spiritual reality of some sort. And that's a very interesting thing, because most people that talk about people that are leaving the church is, oh, they're just done with everything. And it's like, well, actually, if you get to know these people, you talk to them, they're really seeking. If you talk to people that are in this place, a lot of the myths that go around these people are that they never really believed anyway. And you talk to them and they're some of the most passionate believers that you would have ever met. In fact, the data on people that leave is if you, the more often you attend church, the more likely you are to deconstruct your faith. If you read your Bible more often, you're more likely to deconstruct your faith. If you pray more often, you're more likely to deconstruct your faith. If you're in church leadership, you're more likely to deconstruct your faith. Now, it's not to say those people all will deconstruct their faith, not at all. A very small percentage of people are deconstructing in the grand scheme of things. But deconstruction is quite common, the more serious you are about your faith. And people that do deconstruct are often very serious about their spirituality still in many ways. And so it's a really bizarre and interesting world. You can't just say they're dechurched, which is another term, because in some of the studies we've looked at, up to 30 to 35% of people that deconstruct their faith, they walk away from their origin, their faith origin, 30 to 35% still go to church. So they've not dechurched. Most dechurch, but some don't. So you can't say they're dechurched. You can't say they're nuns. You can't say they're disaffiliated. You know, these different terms capture some people that deconstruct, but they also don't capture all people that deconstruct. And so deconstruction is quite a broad term. And so I'll give you the definition of deconstruction, if that might be very helpful. I think that's what you asked for, my long rambling answer. This was a short answer for me, believe it or not. We do a lot of study on the specific group people that deconstruct over through my my work at the Deconstruction Network. That's what we do, is we research people that deconstruct. And what we found in our initial survey is that really it boils down to three key components. So if you can tick the box on these three things, you're probably on some level deconstructing your faith. So the first is that you must question the faith tradition that you've come from. You must question the core values of that. Maybe not all the core values, but you must start questioning some of the core values, and then find those core values, find that faith tradition unable to answer those questions. And so it's not that you maybe go, oh, I'm not sure if Jesus will come back after the rapture or before the rapture. Or, you know, these are more peripheral things. You'll still find a church very easily if you disagree on some of these terms, right? It's not if you go, well, are we allowed to raise hands in worship, or should we keep our hands down? It's like, again, even in a church that doesn't let you raise hands, you probably could raise your hands and they're not going to kick you out. They might just, you know, someone might pull you aside and go, hey, we don't really do that here. You're not going to get kicked out. Generally, the way you know if you're questioning your core values within your faith tradition is you're terrified at the thought of telling your pastor that, right? So the way you know it's a core value is you know that if you had a conversation with your pastor about it, you'd be in big trouble real quick, right? So if you go to your pastor and go, I'm not sure I believe that Jesus ever actually lived, maybe he's symbolic, you know that would go badly, right? I'm not saying that might be what everyone questions. It might be a question someone has. You know, if you say, I don't think there's a hell, I think everyone's going to get to heaven. Again, most pastors are going to maybe have a problem with you saying that. And so these core values must be questioned, one or many core values of your faith. The second point, after you can tick that box, is that subsequently you need to change one or more of your core values. And so it's not just that you question and doubt your core values. To deconstruct, you then move forward and you start to change some of your core values. And so that's just part of the process. A lot of people talk about deconstruction and go, oh, it's just a destructive process because you don't believe anything. No one can believe nothing. You know, even if you just go, well, I don't believe that, that's believing something. You're believing that isn't true. And so there's kind of a myth, and it's often a straw man kind of given by people that kind of try and dismiss people that are deconstructing, going, oh, they just, you know, don't believe anything, they're wishy-washy. But actually, generally, they are questioning and searching and seeking so intentionally. They often know things much more than those that don't do those things. And the third part, which is really interesting and really key, and it often doesn't happen for many for quite a while in the process of deconstruction, is that you find yourself with a reduced certainty and fundamental approach towards the area of faith and spirituality. And this is where you find people that maybe are Christian that can be involved with an interfaith group, right? Generally, a lot of Christians can't be involved in interfaith groups. They're too fundamental. They're too certain. We are right. We couldn't possibly work with a Muslim. Many Muslims, well, we couldn't possibly work with that Christian because we're right and they're wrong, and this would be a problem. Now, a lot of people that are Muslim, a lot of people that are Christian, a lot of people that are Buddhist are very capable of working with people across those borders, but it's because they've started to loosen their hold on their fundamental approach to faith. And so that's a key component of deconstruction as well, is that you'll find as people deconstruct, as they ask these questions, as they change their minds, they find themselves more open to the fact that they probably don't know it all. And actually, even the answers that they've maybe arrived at, if they arrive at answers, a lot of people struggle to find that point. But if they do find some answers, they hold them more loosely. They hold them with a bit of humility and go, well, I kind of really believe this, and I'm going to live my life like I believe this. But I'm also going to hold my hands open and go, if something's better out there, if I have a better answer at some point, I'm going to put this down and move forward. You know, there's a a gentle humility to many people that deconstruct in the long term. And so that very broad stroke over a very complex topic. And you ask 100 people that are deconstruction, what is deconstruction? And very few will give you that. That's more of an academic breakdown of the topic. You know, if you ask most people, you ask people that are doing podcasts and are much more involved in this world even than me, they might give you a completely different answer. And so take all of that with a grain of salt. But yeah, that's in a nutshell what deconstruction is.
Gotcha. Thank you for sharing that. It helps to clarify, definitely. When you look at the term deconstruction, it implies a pulling apart of things and sort of methodically in the way that I interpret that word. So what if someone does come to you well, tell me a little bit more about the Deconstruction Network and what is it? Is it a physical location? Is it a website? Is it can people get involved with it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just one of the many things I do, really. Day in, day out, I work with people that are going through this process and help them and just chat with them, guide them. You know, I have no desire to give them any destination, but I'm happy to hold your hand while you figure out what path to walk. And in the midst of that, I've had a lot of people talk to me, you know, when you deconstruct, it's a very painful and lonely process. For many people that start to deconstruct, unfortunately, because many of these faith traditions are very fundamental, they are very black and white and very dualistic. It is either you are in or you're out. And many of us know that because we've lived that life, right? We've lived for decades being that black and white. So we know what happens when someone turns around and says, I'm not sure I believe this anymore, because we've probably done some of these things to other people at one point or another. And so we know that when I tell mom, I no longer believe in Jesus, or when I tell my pastor, hey, I love Jesus, but I don't see him the way you see him anymore. And I think that gay people should be allowed to be in leadership. You know, some of these things are just, that's the end. You're no longer part of this church. That's the end. You're no longer in my family. You're dead to me, son. Or, you know, some of these things can be so severe, so black and white, which often leaves people without community. They lose their friends, they lose their family. Maybe some people hang around, or maybe they haven't told people because they know that's the ultimate goal. So they still have community, but it's a very hollow community because you can't be yourself anymore. You almost put a mask on. I know mask terminology is quite terrible in 2021, I know. But you put this mask on that is the perfect Christian, and you go to church and you chat with your family over dinner after church or whatever. But you leave that place, you take the mask off, and the mask received love and acceptance and kindness and all that, but you received none of it because no one got to know the true you that's questioning, that believes differently, you know. And so you feel very empty, very lonely, very isolated. And so in my process of helping people and talking with thousands and thousands of people every year, I would come across so many people going, how do I start connecting with people? How do I build community? Now, there's 110 different ways you can do that. And you know, there's amazing opportunities to build connections with people in this world. We're in such an amazing place in 2021 to be able to do that. And there's some downsides to being in this modern world in doing that, and there's some major pros. But one of the things that I found people really wanted was to talk with people that had been through a similar process. You know, I'm excited I can join a photography club and make some new friends that also like, you know, cameras, but they don't get what I've been through. You know, and I would love to talk to other people. And so I have people go, do you know anyone in Austin? Do you know anyone in New Zealand? Do you know anyone in Ohio? And I talk to people every day from these places, but my memory is not at the point where I can be like, oh yeah, that was their email address, or that was their name, or that was their phone. I don't do that. And so I started the Deconstruction Network initially as just a simple way that people could basically put a dot on the map and say, there's a person at this location, you can send them a message. And so you could log in and you could say, I'm in Ohio, show me everyone in, you know, 20 miles outside of my location. And it would draw a circle around your city, and it would say, here's 3 dots, and you could click on them and send them a message and say, here's my story, do you want to hang out for coffee? And you could start to connect. And it was a brilliant, amazing resource. But what I found over time is that there was another way we could start working with these people that were in this network, in that we could start doing data studying and doing research on people that are identifying as deconstructing, because there is no data out there on the category deconstructing, and it's a huge growing topic and identifier. And it's very broad, it's very complex, like we talked about. It includes certain things, but it doesn't fully encapsulate. So if you look at a study done on nuns, that doesn't equate to people that deconstruct across the board, but it equates to some people that deconstruct. Or if I look at people that move from Christianity to agnosticism, maybe, but not all. And so what we wanted to do is we get this broad picture of what is happening when people deconstruct. What does it look like? Where do people end up? How is that journey for them? How does it affect their mental health? How does it, affect their livelihood and all sorts of other things? Who's most likely to deconstruct? Are you more likely to deconstruct if you're active in church or not? And things like that. And so we've started to do some research through the Deconstruction Network as well. And so all of our research we put out online for free. We ask people to participate, and they take one survey a year is all we do, and it's maybe 15 minutes, and it's an accumulative survey. So each survey creates a lot of great data in and of itself, but bit by bit, people come back and continue to do surveys, and it builds a broader, more complex picture of people that deconstruct. And hopefully as well, it will give us a picture of, in 10 years, we can go, oh, this is what it's looked like for certain people as well. We can see certain trajectories and the paths of people that are deconstructing as well. And so all sorts of exciting things there. But that's what the Deconstruction Network is. It's one of the many things that I do in the process of trying to help people that are going through deconstruction. But it just started simply as me thinking, I guess there's nothing out there that helps people meet and connect. And I think while online community is amazing, it's not the same as going to the pub and having a drink or crying on someone's shoulder over, coffee or something, or connecting with someone and getting your families together and, suddenly having that connection again that you've lost after leaving a church, or maybe after being disowned by your family or rejected by friends. Online community doesn't fill all that hole in the way that meeting up with someone does. And so, yeah, that's the Deconstruction Network.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned a couple times in your talk so far, nuns, and I think I understand it as to be someone who identifies when they're asked what is their faith, they say none, rather than we're not talking about nuns in a church, correct?
Yes, sorry, N-O-N-E, not N-U-N. And maybe some nuns do identify as none. Maybe they're a little undercover, but on the census they'll tick that box. So nuns generally they identify as no faith. They might within that be atheist or agnostic. They might say spiritual but not religious. There's a lot of different components, and there's a bit of complexity around how that's defined. Some people define it slightly differently, but generally speaking, that's what it would look like. It would be unaffiliated from any official religion, would fall into that very broad group. So yeah.
Wonderful. Thanks for clarifying that.
And nuns are the fastest growing group in America, certainly. And of the last data that we have on this, I think it's 2019, might be 2018, I can't remember. Nuns are at 23% of America. And that is an astonishing rate of growth. Like I said earlier on, like it's growing at, I think it's 54 million people over the last 14 years have become nuns. Now the Catholic Church would be booming if it was NUNs, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a very fast growing category, and most other religions are shrinking. The evangelical church is shrinking. It's one of the slowest shrinking. The Catholic Church is shrinking drastically. Mainline Protestants are shrinking. The Black church is shrinking. Like all different categories within Christianity is my expertise, but I know that as well, a lot of the other faith groups are impacted by this trajectory as well. And it's not just a young person's game as well. I think a lot of people look at this as, deconstruction, deconversion, all these things. It's just young people doing this. But you'll know, talking to people day in, day out, a lot of people are not young that are doing this. There is more young people than ever. And there's more young people than people that are older. I think 18 through 35, I think 22%. Trying to think off the top of my head what this... I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think about 22% of nuns fall into the category of 18 through 35, which is higher than any other age bracket. I think 35 to 49. The next one is only 14 or something. So there's still big groups, 14% of the population, or 14% of the people that categorize themselves, 12%, I think 7% is 65 or over. But even that, 65 or over is well represented here. It's not just your teenagers that are leaving the church, but they are leaving the church. The teenagers are definitely leaving the church. It's a huge quantity. I think they say 66% of people, of teenagers that have spent 1 year in church or more as a teenager will have left by the age of 19. 66%. That was a Lifeway research study that happened in 2019. Like, that's a huge number. And granted, a lot of people that spent a year in church maybe weren't as committed as people that spent 6 years in church as a teenager, but it's still a very big number of people that are not involved in church that were as a teenager. Sorry, I just ramble, and I just love to give lots and lots of data. So
no, it's
interrupt
wonderful.
me if we want to get to something else.
I do have a couple questions here, and we're getting some in the chat too, so I'm going to be asking those
sure.
as we go along. But the first thing that comes to my mind is that most people, or many people who are brought up within a specific religion, the religion gives a framework or helps to create, or it does create a large part of a person's worldview, the way that they interact with the world, the way that they interact with other people. Many believe that our values come directly from religion or religious teachings that we're inheriting in a sense from our families and our culture. When someone goes through the deconstruction process, what are some questions that they might be able to ask themselves, or to ask a friend, or some way for them to still remain kind of stable in recreating a new worldview for themselves? Because perspective of how they view things is, I'm assuming it's changing somewhat when you remove the religious beliefs from that. So how would you say, what would you recommend for a person who's going through deconstruction? How can they help themselves kind of get through this process without becoming really, really unstable as a person when your whole worldview is shaken and kind of removed, not necessarily purposely, but just sort of as a natural process that evolves as they grow and develop as a person? I think I asked that.
That's a great question. It's a great question. And it's quite a complex question because obviously every person is unique. Every person navigates problems and questions and doubts and uncertainty in slightly unique and different ways. I'm I'm slightly autistic. I'm very intellectual in the way I approach things. And so my way is to just start reading more books, maybe give me some more books I can study and try and figure out the answer, or find myself some certainty or something to grasp to. But other people need to go to a coffee shop and chat to their friends for 28 hours straight, just get it off their chest and feel safe and whatever. And depending on your friend or not, that might be safer or might be very unsafe to do. So we are quite unique. We are all going to do this in our own unique ways. But I think one of the things that is common across the board is that you're going to have to grieve. There is a death that happens in deconstruction, and you're saying it well, your value system, your purpose, your meaning, your relationship with God, even if you still believe in a God or higher power afterwards, in some ways it's going to be a different being almost, because it is going to change. It is going to morph and evolve. And in some ways that relationship changes and evolves. And so you have to grieve the loss of that. You're going to have to grieve maybe a loss of, certainly, even if you manage to bring a bunch of friends with you, you're going to lose some friends in this. Absolutely. Some people are not capable of dealing with people that have radical changes in their worldview. We need people around us that kind of reinforce that our worldview is right. We don't like having a mirror held up that shows that maybe we might be wrong. And so you're going to have to grieve some friendships. And so I think a big part of it, I always try and encourage people to sit with that and allow that to, be something that they process and they work through. Because I think if you fight that, if you hide that, you only make it harder for yourself. But how you go about it, I think surrounding yourself with great people, finding good people that you can find support in. I think that can be quite helpful in finding other people that are going through this or have gone through this. Something like the Deconstruction Network can be a great resource for that. By the way, the Deconstruction Network is completely free. I don't charge, or anything I do is ever cost anything. So if you're thinking, God, this guy's just advertising, I'm like, no, just go and find people. That's all I want people to do. But, you know, connecting with people is a really helpful thing. There's data on people that do this on their own and people that do this with other people that strongly correlates to, if you do it with other people, your mental health is less affected. Your families are less likely to go through strain and stress and potentially dissolve in different ways. You know, there's all sorts of interesting stuff there. And so finding people is a great thing to do. That would be one of the top things I do, but you are going to have to allow it to be what it is. You can't make it something it isn't. And I think that's part of the pain of going through deconstruction, is often fighting what it needs to be. And I see a lot of people that really suffer a lot more than they need to, because they're desperately trying to hold on to something that they're not able to hold on to anymore. It's not going to fit in their new worldview. I think allowing the grief of processing the death of the past way of seeing things, the past way of doing things, and I think by doing that, you can pick up what does that is permitted to move forward with you into your new stage. But you are going to also be able to put other things down and go, that can't come with me anymore. I can't bring that with me anymore. And so there's so much great stuff that comes from our upbringings within so many of these faiths. You know, I personally, I always say, if people contact me all the time that aren't deconstructing, going, oh, you just hate the church or you hate Christianity, I'm like, no. Like, don't hear me wrong. If this is working for you, run. Delete me on Instagram. Never talk to anyone like me. If this is working for you, enjoy it. If it's helping you feel connected to the divine, if it helps you feel connected to humanity, if it's helping you be a better person in this world and helping your neighbor and loving your neighbor, if it's helping you be a great father or sister or whatever, you do that. Wonderful. If at some point you suddenly go, I don't know what I believe anymore and I'm freaking out, give me a call for sure. But otherwise, no, don't go anywhere. And so I think the more we can accept this process, the more we can take what's good from those seasons and move forward. You'll see a lot of people that struggle with this and they kind of burn the whole thing down. And that is sometimes the way you have to do it. Some people need to do that. They need to burn it all down and see what kind of precious, we'll use a Bible analogy, what precious gems are left in the ashes, and they can take them with them. But a lot of people do kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and then come back 2 years later going, where's that baby? You know? And so it's different ways that people can approach. I try and be very non-prescriptive, you know, and I think especially because there isn't, you look at the problem with deconstruction, right, is you can define a lot of different faiths quite easily. Even if they're very broad, you can have a broad description. So even though Christianity is very complex, or even though Islam's very complex, we can give it we can start taking a few steps back and go, okay, yeah, but we all believe in God, Jesus, Virgin Mary, or something like, you know, we all believe in Allah, you know, the Prophet Muhammad, the holy text of the Quran. You know, we can take these broad brushstrokes, but when you go, what does someone that's deconstructing believe? You can't do that. There's no answer there, because deconstruction isn't a category of people that believe something. Deconstruction is a category of people that no longer believe what they used to. And so all I can tell you about them is that they no longer believe what they used to. And so for me to have some form of definition of this is what you should do next would be deeply manipulative, in my opinion. I think it's actually really irresponsible for people in my position to try and steer people in a certain direction. I think what's important is letting people figure out what they need to figure out. And so for a lot of people, one of the things that I would advise as well is to avoid people that are offering certainty, fundamental answers, black and white answers. You've done that. That's actually part of what you're moving away from. Allow yourself to explore, allow yourself to figure out what works for you. People ask me, what do you believe, Phil? And I'm like, what an irrelevant question. Who cares what I believe? That's irrelevant. What do you believe? Oh, you don't know? Well, what do you think you might believe? What do you want to explore? What do you want to look at as an option? Let's rule out some stuff. Let's figure out what works for you. And so I think that's a big part of the process as well, is ruling out what isn't going to work for you and allowing yourself to explore without having people come in and try and go, well, you need to do this. And you'll see this all the time. You'll see evangelicals go, deconstruction is great as long as you use this Bible and you finish with Jesus. And it's like, that's a bit prescriptive there. You've created certainly two things that you're not allowed to question, right? You're not allowed to question this Bible. You have to use this Bible to do what you're questioning. And you have to end with Jesus as the center of all things. And that's the outcome for a lot of people at Deconstruct. Still stay Christian. Absolutely. They love the person of Jesus. They follow the way of Jesus. But a lot of people don't. And so I'm not going to be prescriptive to try and assume that that's going to work for everyone. And I think it's really important that people are hesitant of anyone that is doing that, because you're probably just slowing down your process of going through this journey. You're going to have to rule out a lot of certainties before you get to maybe something that works for you. Sorry, again, rambling. But
no, that's fine. The questions are starting to come in the chat. And so I'm going to start to ask some of those questions. But I do have just a real quick answers here. Is there any length of time typically that the deconstruction process takes? I'm sure it's different for everyone. Can it be one day? Can it be 10 years? Do you have any kind of, from your own experience with the people you've worked with, is there sort of a time?
My anecdotal evidence of working with, tens of thousands over the last 10 years is yes, would be the answer to your question. It can be one day, it can be 10 years, it can be almost anything. Hopefully, we're working on this research in the community, and it's been going for a couple of years. Hopefully, and come back and ask me in 10, 15, 20 years, and I can probably give you some, hey, for 28% of people, it takes 5 years, or, I don't know. I really don't. It really depends on people. You can sit down with kids. I don't know if you have kids, but you have 5 kids, and you sit down with them and you put them all through the same world-changing news. I don't know, Santa isn't real. And one of them goes, yeah, okay, and moves on, right? And the other one is like existential, which way is up? Can I even trust these parents? I'm leaving. I'm going to go live in an orphanage. I don't trust these people. These are people who process things so differently and need to navigate them so differently. And so it's going to look different depending on who you are, your background, your upbringing, your circumstances, your experiences. So many different things are going to shape that. And so unfortunately, I can't say. I could have a good guess if I chatted to someone for 10 minutes back and forth. I'd be like, oh, they're moving along quite quickly, or oof, they are barely peeling back the layer of like the onion, and there's a lot more layers to go. So I can sometimes have a rough idea, but I'm often wrong even with that. So who knows?
Okay, thank you. I figured as much, and I think I just wanted to put that out there so that if somebody's been in this process for years, they don't feel like, gosh, what's wrong with me now? I can't even get, so thanks.
And there's no right or wrong answer, because here's the thing. We're coming from these fundamental religions that believe they are the destination. The destination is the goal. The goal is to be right, and they are right. And that's why they struggle so much with anyone that moves on, because you've moved away from the destination. So they think, well, the only way to move then is backwards. So you've moved back, you've backslidden, or you've walked away or whatever. But the truth is, generally speaking, what we're seeing is that that's not very true for most people. Most people tend to keep moving forwards. And actually, destination is often the problem, having this concept of when will I get there? Well, honestly, if you look at the definition of deconstruction, I don't want to ever stop questioning my core values, coming to new conclusions, and holding things without fundamental approach, like not holding things fundamentally. I want to always do that. No matter what new ideas I come to, no matter what new beliefs I come to, I still want to go, yeah, but I'm going to question those core values if something happens. Someone comes up to me and goes, hey, that works for you, but that's a bit racist. I'm going to go, oh, I hadn't thought of that. That's great input. Let me evaluate that. Let me look at that. Maybe I've got some racism I need to deal with, and maybe I need to change some of my core values. I think that's a healthy thing, right? I don't want to go, nope, sorry, I have now arrived again. And I'm here, I'm at the destination, and I'm going to, boot anyone else out that disagrees with me. So I think often there's a lot of people that talk about, and I saw in the questions something coming up, people talking about loaded words, and then other people talking about reconstruction and things like that. A lot of people challenge this notion of deconstruction and go, well, people need to reconstruct because they see it like a building, right? If you deconstruct a house, you need to rebuild a house, so you're going to end up living in a tent. But the process that we're seeing here as this community defines deconstruction, which is very different. I think someone else mentioned, or maybe the same person talked about Derrida's philosophy of deconstruction, a very different concept. I didn't name this. This is just what people have been using for the last kind of 5-10 years about their journeys, and they decided to grab the term deconstruction, and it's really annoying because frankly it's a very loaded topic within the philosophy world, and it's not the same thing, really. Maybe, again, some overlaps. But a lot of people use the attack and go, well, you need to reconstruct, you need to rebuild, you need to come to new conclusions. A lot of them don't understand what people are doing as deconstructing. Like I said, they are questioning their beliefs. They are coming to new beliefs, and they do believe things. Everyone I've ever met that deconstructs believes something. I've never met anyone in the world that believes nothing, right? Even nihilists believe something. They believe it's worth nothing. It's useless. It's no purpose. That's still a belief. I still have a belief, and atheists believe in something. They don't believe in a God, but that's a belief. I don't believe in a God. And so, I think it's a flawed notion that that we need to have this defined destination, and I think that's built into us from our upbringing. And I think part of that is what's needing to die and be left to the side as we move forward. Generally speaking, I think. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was perfect. And you touched on one of the questions, which I think the person, I believe it's Victoria, was asking if you had created the term deconstruction, and you said it.
No.
It's been used for a while.
There's 110 different words I'd prefer to use, but c'est la vie.
Yeah, we have a question here from Diane. What's the difference between spirituality and religion? I've been thinking religion is man-made and spirituality is individual and unique for each of us. Your thoughts?
Sure. I mean, what's interesting is you can ask 110 different spiritual leaders, what does spirituality mean? And they'll give you a different answer every time, it feels. And so spirituality is quite a complex term. And I saw there was a question right at the top saying, what's the difference between spiritual but not religious, and what does that look like? And I know you're going to be doing something on spiritual but not religious in the future, so I'll maybe leave that to the experts. But there is a difference between religion and spirituality. And I think that generally religion is the infrastructure that we build around spirituality. And I think spirituality historically has been people's way of framing themselves and their themselves within the universe, within their communities, within the cosmos, within the constructs of maybe there being more than we can see. I actually personally say that with that understanding of spirituality, the way that we frame things and give meaning to things, you could even say that atheism in some sense is a spirituality. It's a way of framing things that, oh, well, there is no God and you've got to make your own meaning or whatever. Obviously, atheists have different opinions on how they frame things. But that would still be, in my sense, a spiritual belief. It's a way of framing reality. But other people use spirituality more as like, oh, spirits and the world beyond what we see and all of that different stuff. And maybe that's an option as well. Again, it's these notions that words don't mean one thing, hark back to Derrida, right? Deconstruction doesn't mean one thing. If you're a builder, if you're Derrida, or if you're the Dirty Rotten Church Kids, there's a podcast of deconstruction people. Those three people will give you a different definition of deconstruction, right? The builder is not going to talk about spirituality. He's going to talk about knocking your house down with a wrecking ball. Derrida might talk about spirituality, but it's kind of besides the point. He's going to talk about language and how everything is ultimately all a construct, and we have to take that apart. And so these words mean different things to different people. And so spirituality is going to, generally speaking, mean different things to different people. And so, yeah, I try and avoid kind of locking myself down to what does it mean? What does it not mean? Even as a researcher, that becomes problematic when I have to frame a question about it and I have to actually lock down what it means. But in the day-to-day, I try and go, look, spirituality can mean whatever you want it to mean. If you need to have a spirituality, what does that mean for you? What are you meaning there? What is that to you, and why is it important? I think that's really the only way that matters in the end of the day. Religion is a little bit less flexible because religion is generally funneled by organization, by power, by structures and systems. And that's something, like I think Diane said, is spirituality more of an individual and unique process. And maybe that might be the best way to put it, that spirituality is something that becomes religion when enough people agree to it. If there's enough mass behind it, we'll build a building and, stick a symbol on the top of it and charge people for entry or whatever, or take 10% of their salaries. I don't know.
Gotcha. I have another question about timeliness of this trend toward deconstruction, with so much in the world changing due to globalization and to our interconnectedness, not just within our little communities in our towns, the way things were way back when, people weren't able to communicate outside of their circle of influence or their, you know, their immediate community, and share ideas, and how much of the connectivity within the world due to the internet and due to just change and technology would you say is pushing this movement toward deconstruction?
Sure. I mean, it's a massive reason, a massive, massive reason. You know, a lot of people talk about these huge leaps in change in the way that the world works. You know, you look at the printing press coming on the scenes, and about that time, the Catholic Church suddenly gets questioned. There's leaflets flying everywhere, and people are printing books and pamphlets criticizing the Catholic Church, and it eventually births Protestantism. You know, it's just a powerful new mechanism for the people to be heard and for them to spread ideas that never got spread before. And suddenly you go fast forward 500 years or so, and you have the internet, and suddenly people are, you know, your youth pastor goes, well, here's the thing, you can't have sex before marriage, the Bible says it. And you can be 13 years old, pull out your Apple iPhone or whatever, type into Google, does the Bible really say you can't have sex before marriage? Hit go. And very quickly, you're going to be faced with different ideas. Now, what those ideas and answers are, I'll leave that to your Googling on your iPhone. But that 13-year-old kid immediately has access to all sorts of opinions. They've got theologians, they've got people throughout the centuries, they've got people in France and Greece and Australia, even though they're in Ohio, you know, or whatever, you know, and suddenly they're exposed to different ideas. I was in Louisiana a couple of years ago, right before COVID. I swear I wasn't patient zero over bringing it. But I was speaking to this group, and it was fascinating speaking to people that had been born and grown up in Louisiana their whole lives, which is obviously a very conservative state, and talking to them about different ideas and things, and talking with them about how they had struggled to, as they had deconstructed, they'd started to see things a bit more open and be a bit more inclusive, and they were including the LGBTQ plus community. They were, you know, starting to see other faiths as maybe great people, not the enemy, or, you know, and things like that. And what's interesting is it was a real struggle for them to come to terms with some of these things. Maybe they were starting to question how they vote and their politics and all these different things that can have a knock-on effect with these big changes in our lives. And I talked to some of their kids. I remember like talking to one of their kids, I think she was 14, and I was like, you know, what do you think? Like, you know, you know, I know your parents grew up, and you probably grew up in a home that was very non-affirming of the LGBTQ community. Like, what do you think about it? And she said, well, obviously that's just weird and wrong. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And I'm like, have you ever left Louisiana? No, I've never literally left the state yet. And I'm like, wow. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, so tell me, how do you come to that? And she's like, YouTube, Netflix, Instagram, Snapchat. Like, she's like, I talk to people all over the world. I watch makeup tutorials from people in New York. You know, so even though I'm in a rural town in Louisiana, I'm exposed to people that live in cities, and I'm exposed to people that are in Australia and in Germany, and I'm watching Netflix shows that are actually giving me better sex education than my schools are right now. Because let's face it, sex education in Louisiana, not great. Sorry, it's maybe too much of an opinion there for me, but that's my opinion. You can take it or leave it. And so the next generation is growing up in a globalized world, whether we want it or not. And it is affecting how they see things, right? They're looking at their parents really struggling to come to terms with some of these things that have been hammered into them the whole lives. And they're starting to go, I don't think that's right, but I don't know how to make it right. And I don't know what to do. And they're going, guys, what? Just watch Netflix. I don't know, like, you know, like, what's wrong with you people? And so it's just not an issue for them. And one of the things I'll say, and I think this is really important, is that people talk about deconstruction as though it's a spiritual thing exclusively. And I think when you look at developmental theory, and developmental theory is a subset of psychology, it's a subdivision of psychology looking at how people develop over time. So there might be, you'll probably be very familiar with things like child development theory, right? So we look at kids and we go, oh, between the ages of 2 and 3, they develop an ego. That's why it's the terrible twos, because they suddenly go, I'm a me and I don't want to do what you do. I want to do what I do. And then maybe between the ages of 4 and 6, a bit quicker for girls, a bit slower for guys, they start to have empathy, and they can go, oh, you're a different person than me. And actually you feel different than I feel, and you want things that are different than me. And so we can track these developments over time. What's interesting is you can track these developments of values. You can track these developments for morality. You can track these developments for ego. You can track these developments for all sorts of things. And so this area of study is called developmental theory. And so in the area of values and how values evolve, the common stage that most people are at when they're in a religion is called a conventional stage or traditional stage, it's quite often called. And this stage values certainty, safety, and security. And you'll see it bonds around family, around local community, around religion. These are really common things for people at that stage of development to be at. And it's not like child development. It's not like, oh, well, you're 22, of course you believe that, but when you're 28, you'll stop believing. It's not as simple as that. This is very complex. People spend their whole lives at certain stages. It's much more macro scale. You can look back over civilizations and see them moving through these stages. But the stage after that, generally speaking, it's no longer focused on feeling safe, certain, and secure. It's focused on personal autonomy and growth and development. And it's focused on rationality, logic, and science and data. And so that's just part of growing up as a human. As a whole, people move from that stage of development into the next. And this is what you're seeing as we're seeing across the world. People are moving from that stage into the next. And that's kind of what's happening to most people that are going through this faith deconstruction, is they're moving away from a worldview of needing that safety, certainty, and security and looking to an authority to give it to them. So another core component of conventional stage is that you look to an authority figure to tell you what you believe, and that makes you feel safe, certain, and secure. But at the next stage, you start to go, I don't know, my pastor probably shouldn't be telling me whether I should get immunized or not, because they're not an immunologist. I'm going to look at an immunologist because I look at data and ration and logic, and actually I am my own authority and I make these decisions. And so you see people starting to think for themselves, question things, try and pursue answers, looking to experts in certain fields. And that's really what's happening for a lot of people at this stage. And that's why it also affects their politics. It also affects how they view their families and how they deal with their relationships and all these other things. It's not just your spirituality that's changing. It's the whole way of seeing the world is changing. You're having a totally different outlook on life. And it's very destructive, and it's very hard, and it's very complex, and it can involve a lot of existential dread and, uncertainty and all sorts of different things. But that's part of growing up in a lot of ways. And so, I just want to say that because I think we can fixate on it just being some little interesting thing that's happening to some people spiritually, but actually this is part of growing up, and it's happening in the global community, and globally this is happening to the world. It's slowly moving out of that stage into a more evolved. I mean, America has generally moved out of that stage, and it is more individual, it is autonomy, it is capitalism, it is, all these different things are its values. For better or worse, no stage is right or wrong either. It's important in developmental theory. No stage is right and no stage is wrong. It's just right for you right now. And when it's wrong for you, you'll grow up and move on to a new stage. And so you wouldn't say it's wrong for a 5-year-old to be in kindergarten. You don't put them in uni because university is better. That'd be crazy. It'd be a terrible decision for a 5-year-old. It would stunt their growth. It would ruin their lives, right? And so you just go, no, this is right for you now, and then we'll move on to first grade when you're ready. And so, I don't know if that's helpful to anyone or not, but I don't know. I'll throw it out there.
Very much so. Is there a developmental stage that comes after that?
Absolutely.
Like if we were to keep going, I'm intrigued. Share, please.
Sure. Well, actually, I have about 17 hours of teaching on this. And so I'm not exaggerating. There's a series. So the developmental theory that revolves around the concept of values is one of them is called spiral dynamics. And so I talk about that. If you search my name, Phil Drysdale, spiral dynamics, you'll find a YouTube series. And I talk about it through the lens of Christianity. So I talk about it in general and how it affects the world, how it affects individuals, what their values are. I give examples of different famous people that you might know that you can go, oh, they're at that stage. Oh, interesting, as best I can. No one knows what stage people are at. And people are often at multiple stages. But I kind of give all those different stages in more depth, because I mean, this is a really complex, it's a very complex field of psychology. It's taken 100 years to develop, so I don't want to give a little go-to, but generally speaking, beyond that, people move. So it's a very individual stage, and that can be very lonely, very isolating. And so often people tend to shift as they move forward into a more open community stage. So you'll see people become a bit more globalistic, a bit more open, a bit more inclusive. They often will, having developed their own self and their own values and own ideas, they then start looking out and going, oh gosh, maybe some of the way I live my life affects other people. So maybe I need to change that. And so you'll see people become more active in activism and changing the world. You'll see businessmen that grew up in that stage of individuality and success suddenly go, actually, that's great, but actually, maybe it's not great that I succeed while pumping oil into the ocean. So maybe I need to change the way I do my business, or whatever it is, you know. So people start to start looking beyond themselves, and it does become more global. And so, but there's multiple stages beyond that, that very quickly, small percentages of the world are in these later stages. Most of the world is actually still, the majority of the world is still at this stage of conventional. And so the stage individual is actually still, it's fairly minority. I can't remember exactly. I think it's about 25, 30%. And so the later stages, you're talking 10%, 5%, 1%, 0.1%, you know, they're very, very early in their development. And we're probably, if we're honest and humble enough to accept, we're probably not going to get there anytime soon. Certainly not as a whole community, as a country or anything like that, but maybe individually we might grow enough to do that. But yeah, so I would recommend, if someone really wants to dive into that, there's lots of different theories. So Cook-Greuter has an amazing, it's called Ego Development Theory, and you can read all about that. She's got an amazing 94-page document that really goes into how the ego and the psyche develops and grows. And you'll see in that people that are very fundamental in their religion, and then you can see how it affects and grows. And you can actually see yourself going through some of those stages probably, and you'll certainly see other people. It's often easier to see other people and judge other people than judge ourselves. It's always easier, isn't it? For better or worse. So there's lots of different models. A famous one will be Colbert. Colbert has moral development theory, and so how our morality develops. So very early civilizations and communities see morality as avoiding punishment, and then they move on to gaining rewards. But ultimately, as we keep moving forward, we stop being motivated by such basic things, and we actually want to do things because they're right, you know, because we're wanting to orientate ourselves in a way that is good. And that's why it's kind of funny when people that are very fundamental in their faith go, well, if you leave the church, you'll have no morality. And it's like, actually, your view of morality is some of the earliest, most primitive views of morality right now. And we could probably grow a bit more beyond, I'm not going to kill you because I'd go to hell. That's not a good reason. I don't want to hang out with you at all. Like, I'm terrified of you. And so, you know, there's these different developmental theories that are all so interesting. The child development theories are so interesting as well. And if people are really interested in this, the person I'd recommend checking out is a person called Ken Wilber. He's like a meta development theory. So he looks at how all these development theories kind of play into each other, and is an absolute genius. And so really worth checking out as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's open it up if there are any questions. We are about at the closing time, but if there's anyone who would like to ask a person or a question in person, feel free to unmute yourself if you guys have any questions, or if you want to put them in the chat, we can do that as well.
Stunned to silence.
Yes.
Not sure that's good or bad, but
Yeah. It doesn't have to be either.
No, I know. I'm joking. I don't mind either way. I'm used to it either.
Well, so let's have you. Oh, here we do have a question came in. Just one moment. Thank you for the presentation. It's
You're
not
welcome,
a question,
Diane.
Statement. Yes, and I want to echo that. Thank you very much, Phil. It's been
thank you.
Very intriguing and enlightening, and just a good rundown of the deconstruction process. And I think there's a lot of people going through it, and maybe this talk will be helpful. And could you give us again your website?
Sure. So people that are going through deconstruction, the deconstructionnetwork.com is a great place to go. And just my name, phildrysdale.com is how you can connect with me. As far as communication, I chat all day, every day with people, well, Monday through Friday. So if you want to do that, I only actually connect with people over Instagram. So if you're not on Instagram, sign up for a free throwaway account or something. But I had to kind of limit all the different ways I communicated with people, and that works best. And so you're welcome to connect with me on Instagram. It's just Phil Drysdale. But yeah, I'm always happy to connect and help out in any way I can.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for being here. Just before we go, a couple quick notes. The upcoming programs through the Interfaith Center. This coming Tuesday, we have a program called Recognizing Cults and Abuse of Power with Janja Lalich. She's one of the internationally known experts on cults. So that's going to be at 7 p.m. Tuesday. And then Tuesday, October 12th, we have the program that Phil mentioned in today's program called SBNR, Spiritual But Not Religious, with Linda Mercadante. So the whole program is going to be about that SBNR category, and I hope to see some of you guys then. Thanks so much. Then thank you, Phil.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.